Something like 40% of purchasers are now being influenced by either environmental or ethical reasoning.
Ethics is basically how we treat each other in society.
Many more organisations are looking at ethics because they see it as being the sort of, as it were, the heart and soul of the operation. The public perception of business people is often that they're a bit like profit psychopaths. In other words, they're perfectly nice people during the weekends, and all of a sudden they turn up at 9 o'clock and behave very badly on a Monday morning from 9 o'clock onwards, right through to 5 o'clock on a Friday night, and then they decide to go back to being nice folks again. And that's an unfortunate perception, but I'm afraid that the business community has nobody but itself to blame for that. And that's why business ethics is so important.
There is a change, I think, in society from the 70s to the 90s, where perhaps the make a quick buck of the early and middle and late 70s has changed now into a more social responsible role that organisations have.
Ethics isn't an add-on, it's central, very central to what organisations need to do in the future. And trust, of course, is right there at the top of the ethical issues, the top of the ethical agenda. And trust, actually, is related to cost, in the sense that high-trust organisations are much more likely to be low-cost organisations.
Jack Mahoney is Professor of Business Ethics and Social Responsibility at the London Business School, which was set up by the Dixons Group to further research and develop debate within the business community.
Ethics is basically how we treat each other in society. The growing realization that business, any business, and anyone involved in business has certain responsibilities as to how they treat other people, their workforce, their customers, their shareholders, and the surrounding community. That's business ethics. The actual ethical behaviour, behaving decently with integrity and honesty and loyalty, that's something that many businesses, including perhaps even especially medium-sized and small businesses and family businesses, have been doing for years. They've been ethical without necessarily adverting to it or making a song and dance about it or whatever.
All one has to do is to read any of the papers any morning of the week, and there are these stories about sleaze and corruption and fraud and double dealing and cheating, etc. And that's very regrettable. But I'm not sure that's necessarily because business has become more ethical. I think what's happened is society has rather changed its rules about business, and it's now saying, I'm sorry, I'm much more concerned about the way business behaves than perhaps I ever was before. So society has changed its rules, and therefore business has to change its rules too.
The freedom, I think, that business enjoys is given by society, and it is dependent upon the integrity of the players, the business people, the commercial people, the industrial people.
We have an increasing obligation to ensure that the way that we make important decisions are explained to the public, and we are able to answer questions as to why we've taken a certain decision. And I do know that my own trust board does feel very accountable to the people who use our services.
What's the difference between the cooperative bank and the other major banks? Is it that we have 24-hour telephone banking? Is it that we have a network of high street branches? Is it that we have the use of over 6,000 link cash machines? Or is it that we promise never to invest our customers' money in companies that needlessly pollute the environment?
Ethical investment became popular in the 1980s. Today, the total value of ethical funds is in excess of £420 million.
More and more people are interested in ethical investment. The trouble is we don't necessarily have a common definition of what it means. And it might be worthwhile just to talk about some forms of ethical investment. Some people's view of ethical investment is to say to their broker or their advisor, do not invest in the following companies, whatever those companies may be, because I disapprove of their activities, I disapprove of what they do. They are what I would call the negative ethical investor. Then there are different levels of positive ethical investor, the people who say to their advisor, only invest in the following companies because I approve of them. But then there's been the growing emergence of what I would call the very active ethical investor, the person who buys shares in a company of whom they completely disapprove. In other words, they become owners, in a small way, of that company, because that entitles them to go to the AGM and ask questions about the company's ethics.
A recent Gallup poll of some 30,000 UK consumers found that almost 60% of those surveyed were more worried about ethical issues than they were 5 years ago, and 33% already included moral issues in determining what to buy. The high level of public awareness about ethical issues is accompanied by an increasing preoccupation with the integrity of business itself.
People are now striving for a way in which they can contribute. If it's only buying products from the supermarket that are going to help the planet, people will do it. Even at a time in the middle of a recession when those products cost more, people will make those decisions. So companies that are starting to help people to make a difference are being welcomed.
And if you don't trust the people you're dealing with, you don't believe in their ethics or their morals or whatever, I don't think you can do business properly.
Over the years, you build up a trusting relationship. You know, they trust you to do your best for them, and and get them what they're looking for.
I believe in such a relationship with customers if they trust you. If they come in and you're going to sell a product, and they know that if it goes wrong or it's not right, you'll change it for them. They don't any hassle. They learn to trust you and they'll come back. And personally, I think that is far more important than the price of the product. They can trust us. They know they'll get a square deal from us, which is what it's all about.
Ethical business also has a major role to play in maintaining good working relationships with other companies, suppliers, for example.
We have found, for instance, in clarifying our particular relationships in dealing with suppliers, it clears the air, both those suppliers and for our own staff. They know what is acceptable behaviour and what is not acceptable behaviour. And things like bribes, gifts and hospitalities are made much clearer now. It makes it easier to do business. I've often said that if there are bribes around, it shows that we still haven't got the bottom price. So that in itself perhaps may help us to get a better cash relationship.
In particular, a lot of companies, not just ourselves, are looking kind of upstream by seeing the people that are supplying us. And I've often maintained that that's not so difficult to do, because you can turn and tell your suppliers, listen, either change to this way of working or we won't deal with you anymore. And inevitably they change, which is good, and I hope that carries on throughout society. But we're also encouraging companies to look downstream as well. So we've introduced environmental purchasing policy to make sure upstream we're getting what we want, but we also introduce in other codes where we can look at the ethics of organisations that supply us.
For some organisations where profit is not the primary goal of business, such as charities or those operating in the public sector, adopting an ethical policy provides a structure for resolving areas of conflict. Take, for example, a public body, such as the Preston Acute Hospitals NHS Trust.
There are quite a large number of ethical issues which emerge in any given day in a hospital. Because we are part of the public service, there is a requirement placed on us by the government to adopt public sector values, and they have defined those recently in a publication that came out to the whole of the health service. So the way in which the trusts conduct its business has to fit in with the guidelines that we've had from the government. In addition to that, we now operate within the health service under the concepts of an internal market. Hospitals compete for business with each other. And across the health service as a whole, we're having to come to terms with what that means in practice. How strongly do we market our services? How strongly do we compete for business with other hospitals? How hard do we try and convince general practitioners to refer their patients to my hospitals rather than the hospital next door or down the road or whatever? And I think this is still developing and still emerging, and one can understand that we have to think very hard about the style with which we actually work within the internal market. Is it ethical for us to consciously work to take business off another hospital down the road to the extent to which that hospital becomes non-viable?
Nowhere is the need for ethical behaviour more necessary than with employee relationships.
Ethical relationships inside a company are, in my view, probably the most important ethical relationship that exists. In other words, if a company can't be clear and fair and honest with its staff, what hope does it have of projecting an image of being clear and honest and fair? None, I would suggest. And again, all the research confirms this. That where there are high ethical standards inside an organisation, there will be high ethical standards looking out of the organisation.
Ethics figures into our organisation in providing a service experience. The teamwork that has to take place between all the people creates service. So the business benefit of creating those relationships and spending the time and effort on recruiting the right people, training them in the right way, providing the right framework for them, is that you have a great experience for your guests to come in. They will be more likely to return. You build your business on that basis.
The changing nature of business activity and changes in the shape and makeup of companies in the future will demand an even higher level of ethical awareness in employee relationships.
Networked organisations, it seems to me, in order to work effectively, will have to become, and I hate to use this word because it's the only word I can think appropriate, will have to be obsessed with fairness. In other words, we'll probably want to put ethical issues at the very top of the agenda all the time, because the profits and the return and the volumes will come through lots of people acting quasi-independently, or almost completely independently.
Good relationships with all these interest groups are not only essential to good business, but vital to the maintenance of a company's reputation.
Well, it's a piece of received wisdom in business that good ethics is good business. And there are many ways in which this is obvious. Look at the companies that we all respect and that we like to buy from. Marks and Spencer's is obvious. Levi Strauss is another. ICI is another, and so on. Precisely because they have a reputation for honest dealing, for integrity, and so on, then we buy from them, and we go back and we become repeat purchasers from them. So being ethical for them pays.
If you've got a high trust organisation, then almost automatically integrity is a bottom line issue. It's always been accepted in the medium and the long term, but even in the short term, good ethics is probably good business.
Hebden Lindsay's Ethics in Business package offers an integrated, consultative approach to business ethics. It aims to help firms construct their own approaches to ethical business out of their own values and realities. The second video in this package demonstrates to the workforce the importance of ethics to sound business. It also discusses, in general terms, some of the areas an ethical policy might address and suggest ways in which organizations can move towards adopting an integrated and comprehensive ethical policy.